All right, it's Monday, and I've got a couple extra things to do today. My son's on a job in Atlanta, so my grandson and I are taking care of the guinea pigs, the quail, and a dog. So I got to go take care of that in a little while, but I'm going to work out this quick lesson for us. In Luke 16, chapter 16, Jesus tells a parable of an unjust steward. Now, this has always been a difficult parable for most folks, but I think I understand it, maybe because I have a construction background, and I think probably anybody that has done any kind of physical work that somebody really appreciated probably understands the difference between the activities of this world and in how those activities are opportunities to create something in heaven. Well, anyway, the steward, he's been cheating the master for a long time. According to the parable, he's been cheating, he's dishonest, and then the master finds out about it. So the master sends word to him, said, well, bring the books in, we need to look at the books and see what's going on. So he knows he's going to get fired no matter what. So what he does is, while he's still in charge, he calls in 4 or 5 people, that owe the master money or owe the master some produce. And he says, like, for example, one guy might owe 100 containers of olive oil, and he marks it down to 50. Well, that guy's happy with that. Well, then another guy owes, a couple hundred bushels of wheat, and he marks it down to, like 75 or so. And then somebody else owes the master some other produce, some wine, and so he marks that down. So anyway, what he does is I guess he kind of figures out how many friends he'll need when he's put out on the street to have somewhat of a place to call on these favors and then live. Well, Jesus in the parable now, remember, it's a parable. It's not really an actual thing that took place, but Jesus is using it to teach a lesson. So in the parable, Jesus commends the dishonest steward. And he says he was able to use dishonest activity and the use of these material and worldly items to create something different, favor amongst people in the community. Meaning, so he took physical items and he created something that's not physical. He created favor. These people now owe him, so that when he is dismissed, he has a place to go. So that's the point. A lot of people get hung up on the fact that he's dishonest, but the point of the parable is he used tangible items to create intangible items. And he practiced dishonest work to create something valuable to him. And then Jesus says, so if dishonest work, or somebody who's dishonest, can produce something valuable, well, how much more should you expect good work to produce something valuable? And then he goes on to say, people that are faithful with little are faithful with much. And that term little fits in here because it's little can mean worldly. It can mean small. It can mean simple, but it can also mean worldly compared to heavenly, meaning it's the word little and much in this verse where it says those who are faithful with little are faithful with much. Putting the two together is actually describing the difference between the dishonest work producing a certain valuable favor, and then how much more would good work produce valuable favor. And then later we find that Jesus tells us that we need to concentrate on doing the types of things that produce treasure in heaven for us, not treasures on this earth. So he's kind of then, if you want to take that concept a little bit and compare it to this, what he's saying is you can see how if you try to build up treasures on earth, how the more you work at it, the more treasures you build up. You said, well, how? Well, so the same concept works. If you're going to work real hard at heavenly things, you're going to build heavenly treasures. So the more you work, the more treasure, but you got to focus on where you want the treasures. So I'm going to tell you a story. When I started working for carpenters, it was pretty standard for the carpenters to go about as fast as they could. And a lot of the trim they would put up around the ceiling, around the doors and windows, they would have big cracks. And when we were first working with them, we would point that out and say, man, that's a big crack. And everyone we worked for simply said, the painter will fix that. Well, the painters always hated that because it messed them up so much. They would, if you had to put 3 and 4 layers of caulking, every time you put caulking, you got to let that dry. So it would mess up their time frame where it might even make them have to spend 1 or 2 extra days on a job because they're waiting for the caulking to dry as they fill up all these big cracks. Well, another thing that they did that always bothered me was when they would hang the sheetrock, they would just mess it. I mean, it looked terrible. And then the sheetrock finisher would come in and they'd have to spend an extra day or two. First, they have to patch all the bad spots, all the parts that were broken or missing or torn up, and then the next day they could start their work. So it was always adding days to their work. But when we started building the houses ourselves, my goal was that no painter would have to have more than 1 pass of caulking, meaning the little cracks that were on all the molding and stuff. When he put that caulking, all he had to do was put 1 pass of caulking and wipe his finger, and it was done. That way he could come in 1 day, do all the caulking in the whole house, and then the next day he could start painting. Well, also, my goal was that the sheetrock finisher would not have to fix any of my mistakes. That wasn't his job. That was the carpenter's job. So anyway, we hung that sheetrock in such a way that when the finishers would come, well, they would just start finishing. They didn't have to do all that patchwork and miss a whole day. And we even had like a little joke among us all, and I started this with them, but anytime that they found a screw head that was sticking out, they would come and get me or one of the other guys, and I would give them $1. I would go screw the screw in for them, and I'd give them $1. And look, there was a lot of jobs we didn't ever have to give out $1 because we checked all that. So anyway, what happened was I'm practicing a worldly trade, okay? I'm doing a physical job, but we're creating something much different than that. We were creating the idea that I cared for the other trades. I cared for the people in the other parts of the job. And pretty soon, they began to show me a lot of extra concern, meaning if I needed something out of the ordinary, they would do it for me. So what I'm saying is I was doing a physical job, which in this term would be a little job, a little thing, but it was creating something much bigger. It was creating the idea that we cared about each other and we cared about each other's work. So we were taking a physical job and creating something entirely different. And that's an example of how you can practice something in this world, but create something that's much different. You might even say you can practice an earthly trade, but create a heavenly idea or a heavenly principle or create a heavenly treasure because you're pulling people with you into another idea. Meaning the people that were doing the work, the painters and the sheetrock finishers, They weren't just with me here at the bottom. When we began to care for one another, all of a sudden we were all participating in something quite different. And it was, we were able to take something that was in this world and make it into something above this world. So you can do little things like that. But if you do those little things in such a way that people know you care, see, just helping somebody is a physical act. But if they believe and feel and experience the care you have for them, now we're talking about something that's outside the physical world. Jesus tells a story, gives an example about salt and light. And he says, nobody would light a candle and then put a box on it or a tub or put it under a basket. You know, that would be silly to waste a candle like that. Why would you light a candle and then cover it up? And then he says, so you are the light. So therefore, if God has given you light, there's no way God's going to put a box over the top of you so no one can see your light. But he's going to raise you up in a way he needs to raise you up to give light to the whole room, the whole world. So you have a light in you. And that light makes it possible for you to do a worldly activity in such a way that people begin to experience something outside of this world. So at the end of his little description about light, Jesus says, so shine your light in such a way that people will see your good works and give honor and praise to God in heaven. So we don't do it for that reason, but what he's saying is so you practice your worldly activities in such a way that the way you practice that activity causes people to see and experience what God is doing. A lot of little things we have the opportunity to do that don't seem even valuable on this earth. But if we do them a certain way, they will create something much, much better, much, much higher. So practice your skills, practice your opportunities, and practice, your disposition and all these things. Everything that you do in this world, use all the resources God has given you in this world in such a way, use those little things to create much things. I'll see you in church Sunday.